The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask has become a hugely popular topic to discuss for Nintendo fans over the last decade. What was once seen as Ocarina of Time's neglected sibling has turned into a game that has been analyzed heavily from so many angles that you'd think the discourse surrounding it has settled. Despite discussion of the game's beta and development, depressing story analyses, and plausible theories that are as crazy as they are clever, I felt there just had to be more to discuss about this game. I set out to find any bit of info related to the N64's swan song that may be obscure or forgotten. And after a lot of digging, I left with more than I ever expected. Let's take a look into Nintendo's foray into viral marketing with The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. If you've ever scoured the internet for video game commercials from 20 years ago, because yeah, that's a completely normal thing to do, you've probably come across this commercial.
Radio Zelda is now transmitting.
He's playing. He's playing, I knew it.
While this commercial kind of makes me feel like I'm watching a student film, it's a mysterious and effective piece of marketing that I've seen come up in discussions revolving around Majora's Mask. And it shows that Nintendo knew that this game was different. It's dark, it's dreary, it's not the Zelda you know. I've seen this commercial a few times and it doesn't seem like a typical TV commercial. It's 2 minutes and 18 seconds, which is way too long for a standard TV spot. But what really sent me down the rabbit hole we're about to dive into was the story this commercial tells. This is how the commercial starts.
Radio Zelda is now transmitting.
Then it repeats here.
You've been tuned in to Radio Zelda.
And here.
You're listening to Radio Zelda.
And here.
This has been a broadcast of Radio Zelda.
The commercial is acting as a radio broadcast, one that covers Link's attempt to save the world in a real-world setting. The execution of the commercial is a really cool and experimental approach that I think would work tremendously well with the game today. Anyways, with the discovery of Radio Zelda and never hearing a peep about this radio broadcast elsewhere, I decided to use the only resource I know how to use, the internet. My first thought was that Radio Zelda would have been a website for Majora's Mask marketing. You know, screenshots, info, buy now, that kind of thing. After all, it was the early 2000s. The internet was booming in popularity, and I wouldn't expect Nintendo to air a radio broadcast where only a small group of people would hear it. I gave the domain radiozelda.com a go, which unfortunately does not exist. Radio Zelda seems to be a record label now. With no luck, I went back to when Radio Zelda would have meant something. I decided to dig into old websites using Internet Archive, and I was ecstatic to find that radiozelda.com actually existed. Like I thought, this is definitely a website meant to advertise the game. Obviously, this acted as a news site in a fictional setting, but what could possibly warrant an entire news website full of possible Zelda goodies and all of these fictional stories? Keep this website in mind. For some additional context, let's follow this link, which takes us to zscience.com. So, zscience.com takes us to a site with nothing but a logo that looks to be some sort of space organization. Dromoa, as we'll call it from here on, stands for Joint Research of Alternate Mondial Occurrences and Astral Planology. It's sort of obvious, but when I realized that Dromoa is an anagram for Majora and there is an entire website behind this landing page, I was honestly pretty excited. Sure, it's just a few websites created by some marketing team, but it's not every day you come across little-known content from one of your favorite games, and these websites seem to hold some heft. But how have I never heard of this? Before jumping to conclusions, how can we be sure Nintendo themselves made this site? Well, searching for the URL zscience.com today redirects you to the 1-2-switch store page. I guess Nintendo didn't want to lose the domain and delegated it to
Eating contest!
Also, you can check who owns domains through whois.net, and yep, Nintendo of America owns it. Now, I know we're hopping around a lot, we'll get to the bulk of the websites in a second, but I just didn't have enough context. Since I haven't heard discussion about either of these websites online, I wanted to know what finding this in 2000 must have felt like. Which got me thinking, was there any hype or coverage on this? zscience.com was originally and possibly only reported on by IGN, or IGN64, on August 17th, 2000. The site published an article called The Science of Z, stating that they had received an email from a reader who accidentally stumbled upon the site. At the time, they didn't have much to report on, as they weren't too sure what the purpose of zscience.com was. All they knew was there's this website that talks about an alternate universe that is parallel to ours, and Dromoa is researching this in an attempt to manipulate the parallel dimension. What made this worthy for a games-focused news site to report on, though, was the organization's sponsors. Right at the top of the sponsors list is Nintendo of America, which seems completely out of place for a website covering time and space, especially given the 3 accompanying sponsors are all completely fake companies. Just 5 days later, on August 22nd, IGN published another article where readers weighed in on what they believed this site was. Most readers came to the conclusion that this was in fact a teaser site for the upcoming Majora's Mask. But what was it about this that said, I'm advertising the next Zelda game? Well, I'm glad I asked because we have so much to talk about. Finally, let's get back to zscience.com. Clicking this logo takes you to the actual website. It's a science blog where posts were made about a variety of topics. News reports on the end of the world, the organization's info, their sponsors, completely fake science concepts, and so on. They did a really great job of fleshing this out as a somewhat realistic webpage. If you showed this to me and told me it was NASA's website from 2000, I'd probably believe you. Without going through page after page of science fiction, to summarize, zscience.com covers the narrative that there are at least 4 alternate dimensions beyond our own. The world is coming to an end and there is only one person who can stop that end. However, they must be genetically perfect for the job. Some posts found here have nothing to do with Majora's Mask itself, and are here to generate this narrative the campaign is creating further. With all the boring stuff out of the way, it's time to move on to the exciting stuff, the Zelda tidbits and Easter eggs. First up is Dr. Terran Rugeshi, a character that acts as Dromoa's chief engineer on the Dimension Data Project. Most Zelda fans are familiar with the name Terran. This is no doubt a reference to Terran from Link's Awakening. The last name is definitely strange, but upon closer inspection, you'll probably notice that it's an anagram for Shigeru, as in Shigeru Miyamoto, the game's producer. Next is a staff writer for zscience.com, Amonua Mago. Amonua is an anagram for Aonuma, or IG Aonuma, the game's director, and Mago is an anagram for the spider-like creature that shows up in many Zelda games, Goma. zScience doesn't have too many Majora-related articles, but of the few that matter, Dromoa launches international search for the one that sums up the purpose of this website. In this article, Dromoa announces launching an initiative to search for a candidate to save the world. They need to find somebody who falls under all of these criteria. The one they're searching for is somebody who can save the real world from its impending doom, while also being a reference to Link, obviously the hero of time, having to save the world. After locating multiple possible DNA matches for candidates to save the world, they finally find the one. Where zscience.com comes to an end is with the one and only Bryce Wilson, a 17-year-old American boy who apparently has the genetic code necessary to save the world, or rather use his keen eyesight, extreme patience, and superb hand-eye coordination to play through Majora's Mask. If Bryce saves the world in Termina, then he will save the moon from crashing into our world. Although that wraps up the story of zScience, the final noteworthy piece on the website is an interview with Dr. Terran Rugeshi, but this was actually published over at sci-fi.com. This is a really strange partnership that attempts to make Dromoa feel more credible, but I just can't imagine a modern-day Nintendo partnering with a TV network like this. The interview at sci-fi.com is a short paragraph about Rugeshi's studies and a summary of events from Dromoa that also mention that people that access zscience.com were able to vote for which candidates they believed would be capable of saving the world. I was unable to access this feature on the website myself. It possibly could have gone unarchived. The biggest takeaway from the sci-fi interview is that there are 3 decently high-quality wallpapers included that are supposed to be electrophotoscopic photos of the universe. Electrophotoscopic is absolutely a fake word that I never want to say again, but seeing these wallpapers is pretty cool. I never expected to see something like this come from a Zelda game, and it's nice that these were archived. That's the majority of noteworthy tidbits from zscience.com. Again, this is a teaser site, so not a substantial amount of info related to the final game is here. What led us to Dromoa in the first place is that Radio Zelda commercial. Let's go back to radiozelda.com so we can make a little more sense of this mess we've got ourselves into. Where all of the fun reporting comes in is on Radio Zelda, which was a news site that reports on all of Dromoa's findings. The site is broken up into 3 distinctive categories: watch, listen, and read. Unfortunately, most of the videos and audio files under the watch and listen tab are lost. It doesn't seem they were archived. Tons of content could have been lost. It's my hope somebody out there still has those files. First, let's take a look at what is in the watch and listen section. While I do believe that the Radio Zelda commercial that brought us here was likely separated into clips for the watch section, I was only able to find a single video that definitively comes from the watch section. Juanita's Psychic Red Hotline was re-uploaded by the YouTube channel GameCrunch in 2014. Radio Zelda reports that a reader sent an infomercial of a psychic hotline to them. During this clip, a man asks the psychic if his girlfriend will accept his marriage proposal, and Juanita responds,
I'm gonna look into the future and see if you are married. And no, there is no future. Everything is dark for everybody, including Juanita. Okay?
Okay. No, what do you mean everything is?
I told you, I'm looking into...
Overall, this clip is pretty over the top and has almost no resemblance to the game itself. but does add context to Radio Zelda. I'm glad GameCrunch was able to re-upload this so it isn't lost in obscurity. The listen section is completely dead. None of the audio files can be played anymore. But what is left are more Zelda Easter eggs. The listen section shows who submitted or published each audio file, and each person's name is a reference in some way to Majora's Mask. First is Andre Zora, referring to the Zora race in the series. We also have Bremen Keaton, referencing both the Bremen Mask in the game and Keaton, the fox-like animal in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. And finally, Rosa Kamaro, taking the Dancing Sisters and Dead Dancer's name Kamaro. Moving on to the read section, there are a ton of fun and unique articles on Radio Zelda, as well as articles explaining what much of ZScience.com was trying to convey with their overcomplicated posts. I've done my best in trying to narrow down all the articles with pertinent info to Majora's Mask. Let's start with the article Good News and Bad News, which is essentially a retelling of what's needed to stop the moon from crashing. My favorite part of many of these articles are the pictures they add. They're pretty wild and seem fully acted out. Initially I thought they may just be stock photos, but I can't reverse search or locate them anywhere, leading me to believe the majority of these photos were taken somewhere within Nintendo of America or by the team behind marketing this game. But that's all just speculation. In this article specifically are images of doctors working for Dromoa named Diego Romani, referencing Romani of Romani Ranch, and Garrow Stone, referring to Don Garrow's mask, and Stone possibly referring to Stone Tower Temple, but that could be reaching. Making the Most of the End of the World is a Q&A article with crazed Doomsday prepper Binky Pinkerson. The article has Radio Zelda ask questions about Binky's urban survival course, and he spout nonsense, as well as referring to the end of the world taking place on October 26th, 2000, which is yet another reference, was the release date of Majora's Mask in North America. BinkyPinkerson.com is the first of many fake partnering sites through Radio Zelda, and this one advertises itself as an agenda for his survival course. Here's a handful of comedic filler, and then a small game reference under the agenda's 1:30 to 2 p.m. activity, the art of making masks. Binky says the most useful item of any survivalist is his or her collection of masks, and that while the creepy mask guy in the village sells them, you can make your own with resources lying around any common kitchen. This creepy mask guy is definitely a nod to the Happy Mask salesman. If you had any doubt Nintendo made a website that seems so unfortunately real and ugly, well, BinkyPinkerson.com would redirect you to Pikmin's website in September of 2001. One of my personal favorite articles on the site is titled Mysterious Masks Related to the Moon. The article reports on masks appearing all around the world in strange places. Majora's Mask, or an unnamed mask in Radio Zelda's world, is seen burned into cornfields in Ohio, floating in the clouds above Ireland, and in plants in the botanical gardens of Sri Lanka. While they definitely didn't actually place masks around the world, I absolutely adore viral campaigns and think it could make for a really cool one, to physically place and make these designs in locations around the world. I feel it would be extremely worthwhile, especially today when most of the world has access to the internet and findings could be shared in an instant. This is a pretty wild one. Hogarth serves up fried chicken and hidden history, investigating a website from a reader in New Hampshire named Jeremy Hogarth. Hogarth's homepage of hidden history, under the URL Crypto-Chronology.org, delves into the history of the Mask of El Jomara, which is apparently the history of Radio Zelda's Majora's Mask. Everything on Crypto-Chronology.org is probably as far from canon as you can get, but some Zelda theories could definitely be crafted around this website. Crypto-Chronology.org attempts to tell the story of the Mask of El Jomara, but gets sidetracked, since this is playing the part of an overly obsessed blogger. According to the website, while the mask's creation apparently can't be tracked, it was first referenced in a fictional book by Dr. Philip Asusa called Legends, Myths, and Mysteries of the Nile Valley. The book states that the mask was discovered by the Knights Templar in 1237 AD. Near the Nile was a small village called El Jomara, where a Templar knight traded a bag of soot for the Mask of El Jomara. The rest of the site is looking for coincidences with masks and moments throughout history, kind of like I'm doing by making this video. The final section worth looking into is the Society section of the website, meant to connect a community of people. The following are all GeoCities pages, which was a simple-to-access web hosting site owned by Yahoo until about 2009. They were most likely created cheap and quickly to fluff up the website, with a couple of exceptions. This one surprises me. While it's still a GeoCities site, it is heavily focused on religion, mentioning God's wrath, Satan himself, and other apocalyptic prophecies. It's got that grimy early 2000s website look, and I'm shocked Nintendo affiliated themselves with this website at all. This one was definitely not made by Nintendo. It's still active today under the URL almageddon.com. I wonder if they needed permission to use these websites on Radio Zelda, or they just threw some links down to pad this out. I could try to read further into the other two GeoCities sites, but overall it's just more astral godly talk with no substance really. All you need to know from these two are they focus on parallel universes and prophecies. Finally, to wrap things up is the Phobos Impact Scenario through YOWUSA.com. The Phobos Impact Scenario covers a theory where one of Mars's moons would crash into the planet. I don't think you need to hear that this was probably included as a reference to the moon crashing into Termina. YOWUSA.com stands apart from the rest of the websites under the Society section as it is still active to this day and not a Nintendo site. Radio Zelda and ZSides.com are filled to the brim with cheesy and ridiculous articles and stories. I only covered what I thought would be most interesting, but there are loads more articles, stories, and even additional websites. So if you're at all interested, I absolutely recommend doing a bit of digging yourself to get the full intended story. Thank you for taking the time to sift through an incredibly niche marketing campaign of my favorite Zelda game with me. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and to stay up to date on all of our uploads, be sure to subscribe to LootPots.